Hey everyone, this is Ankur Varma, licensed psychotherapist and co-founder of Brown Man Therapy, a nonprofit where we aim to normalize mental health conversations among South Asian men, connect them to culturally grounded care, and build strong community networks. This is the Guys and Chai podcast, and we're super excited to have you here for one of our initial episodes. Guys and Chai is a space where honest, unscripted conversations about mental health, identity, and pressure unfold between men trying to make sense of our lives beyond success. So now I'm excited to introduce you to our guest for today, who will share some of his story behind his success. We have with us today Rahul Sharma, PsyD. He is a psychologist. He's the founder of Strategic Inclusion Consulting, leadership strategist, executive and nonprofit coach, clinical psychologist, wellness consultant, keynote speaker, and founding member of Funkadesi, a great band, and and a good friend. We have become friends, Rahul, as our on our time as part of the leadership team at South Asian Solidarity Movement. And it's really been a pleasure getting to know you. And last but not least, Rahul Sharma is our 2025 Mental Health Champion Awardee. He received that award at our Diwali Gala in fall of 2025. So, Rahul, really, really glad to have you here. Um, this is Guys and Chai. So let's start off talking about Chai. I was telling you before we started, I have the privilege of actually having my parents visiting right now. So I am actually drinking my mom's chai, which is a really cool experience for this episode. So get us started. Tell us about chai. Tell us about you.
Listen, well, first of all, it's an honor to be a part of this podcast. So thank you for inviting me. My first question is it just my parents or is evaporated milk a thing with chai? Because my parents discovered cans of evaporated milk, and ever since they found it, they will use nothing else in their chai. So we'll use our families from Kenya. We'll use like loose
Mm,
leaf Kenyan tea, and we'll put chai masala, and but it's got to be the evaporated milk.
mm. You know, I think in my household, we use just regular milk. I definitely have had the evaporated milk. I'll have to ask. I'll have to ask my mom, my parents about that to see if that's something they ever considered or had a period with evaporated milk. But currently, no. I think we're just on 2%.
All right.
All right. So I shared with everybody your LinkedIn bio, literally. We want to know the idea of Guys and Chai, as you know, is to get behind the labels that people see us as in our professional life or otherwise. And so, really, the idea today is to get into who Rahul is, kind of behind those labels, behind the work that you do, uh, and so really, and like I said at the top, this is unscripted. So we have not talked about what questions I might ask or what parts of your life story you might share. So where do you want to kick us off? I know you mentioned something about evaporated milk and being your family being from Kenya. So somewhere
That's a
between Kenya
first.
and evaporated milk, where should we start?
All right. Between Kenya and evaporated milk, let's start there. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Kenya, and that's a good place to start because for me, just to paint a picture in the middle of my life story, 1990, I'm like halfway through college, don't do the math. And I visit Kenya, and I have this magical night where it's my father who, brought us to Michigan before I was born. So me and my three siblings were grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. My sisters were born in Kenya, and me and my brother were born in Kalamazoo. But so for me, this was a point in my life where I was about to have my cultural identity transformation. And it was in 1990, sitting with my father at a bridge table with his two brothers who remained in Kenya and asking a question about growing up. And story after story after story, some of them really funny, some of them really profound. Um, it was just an avalanche of stories that really hit home for me my history does not begin with the United States, and my heritage, and with all the stories, um, and the history of double migration, all of that is of value, and it's up to me to um, preserve that, embrace that, and find a way to be authentically me in my American ways,
Mm,
but also water my cultural roots.
mm. I love that if you can talk more about that because I already started to see the picture being painted. I know in my own life sitting around with my, my parents or my other relatives and hearing their stories and hearing about like you're alluding to here, your origin, right? And recognizing and realizing that your origin actually started, long before what you actually thought of. What came out of that experience for you? Were there any specific stories or learnings? And then how did that affect you? You said you're in middle of college, which is a pivotal time in life.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Yeah, great question. I think one thing was hearing the story of my father's father, who
Mm,
had a couple and I actually, the year I was born, my dad convinced him to sit in front of a typewriter and to type out all of the stories that he would share orally, in terms of his own life. And my dad encouraged him to put it all on paper. And I got a chance to read his manuscript a couple years later in 1992 when I went to India for the first time. I'd gone to Kenya multiple times growing up, but anyway, this story of him as a teenager making his way to Kenya and working on the railway, and he was working under a fuel contractor, Bishan Singh. And one day, my grandfather and some other laborers were walking around along the railway in Kenya, and a British military officer, Captain McStead, stops everybody and says, "Why don't you stop what you're doing and work for the military? We'll pay better." And my grandfather pointed out, "Well, there's this contract with Bishan Singh. We can't do it." Captain McStead became irate and he demanded to see Bishan Singh. Bishan Singh had done nothing wrong, but
mm,
in the public square, he grabbed Captain McStead, grabbed Bishan Singh by the beard and shook him violently and said, "You're mistreating your workers." Bishan Singh was so freaked out that he went into hiding. And 3 days later, the Germans blow up a portion of the railway and
mm.
so Captain McStead blames Bishan Singh and my grandfather and all the laborers of harboring with the enemy. And they were rounded up, and three of my grandfather's dear friends were shot without a trial.
Wow.
And my grandfather was able to, uh, just by chance, there was a change in the chief magistrate or the judge. So my grandfather got a trial right before he goes out into the courtroom. These military officers stop him and say, "Look, some of your friends are already dead. Just say you did it and we'll let you live. But if you try, say anything else, we'll kill you." And my grandfather goes in the courtroom and he says, um, "These people want me to lie. I won't lie. I'll never put innocent Indian names to shame. You can do whatever you want. You can kill me." And then there was a doctor in the courtroom that testified, "I don't think we can kill him. He doesn't even look like he's 18 years old." And
Mm,
so he was sentenced to 10 years hard labor, ended up serving 3 years and, near the border in Kenya, and then was released, eventually made his way to Nairobi, started a grocery store, and got enough income to send my father and his two older siblings to England for schooling. So, uh, that was an intense story, and, but for me, it it reminded me how important it is to, in the face of anything and everything, to be truthful, to stand on the side of truth and self-respect and dignity, and, I think that, among other stories, has really stood out in terms of the work that I do, but also the work that other family members do. And So we carry that with us in various ways.
Wow. I never knew that about your family story and how close a call that was for your grandfather. Your father was already born at that time.
No, no,
Oh, this
this
was
was
later
this
that
is
he
no,
said.
no, no.
Okay, wow.
My grandfather was 17, 18 years old when the
Okay,
oldest happened,
wow.
you know? So, and if you had that much courage at that age, you know, that helps put wind in my sails in terms of, you know, when I'm facing something, am I gonna muster up the courage? Well, I'll
Mm.
think about my father's father and what he did.
Just sit with that because that's a lineage altering moment
Yes.
here that your grandfather faced. And so, what did um, young Rahul take away? How did
Yeah.
that impact you? You know, you said middle of college. What happened next? You went back to school, and how did
Yeah.
that story
Yeah.
manifest inside of you
So
after that?
at the time, I was pretty involved with um, the campus's sexual assault prevention center. I was doing a lot of work on what men can do to address issues within, you know, how we're socialized and how everyday, male role socialization can lead to sexual harassment, sexual assault, violence against women. And I was at the time, for whatever reason, most of us that identify as people of color, I think we might gravitate towards our identity as people of color or our specific ethnic group first. For me, for whatever reason, I was thinking a lot more about gender and male privilege before I started to think about what it meant to grow up in the United States as a person of color. And that trip to Kenya and my experience with other people of color in that sexual assault prevention organization, we had our People of Color Caucus. Um, that really helped. Those two things sort of combined and helped me say I really need to seek out elements of my culture of origin and find a way to bring that into my world.
And how did you notice that happening both, you know, what flowed well from there in terms of that growth, but what I'm also curious about the challenges you faced, you know, coming from visiting your family and being in Kenya back to actually I don't know where you went to school for college,
The
but
University of
uh,
Michigan.
you did go to University of Michigan.
National
The
champs,
recent
baby, go
national
blue.
champions. Congrats to you. You know that I have conflicted feelings about that
Yeah. Hey,
internally, but
hey,
you know,
if you want to unpack that at all, I just want to say we're number one.
maybe that'll be our part two episode. But
This
we can do
podcast
that.
interview is over.
Okay, so I'm curious about like you had this moment where you're recognizing bigger pieces of your identity and where you've come from and that it sounds like also reinforce some of the work that you were already doing, some of the interests that you already had,
Hmm.
what you were doing back in the States. Um, so how did that go? And then what did you face here as you were trying to, you know, do some of this work? That's early on in the early 90s to be doing some of this work that
Yeah.
now has become more normalized. So I'm curious
Yeah.
kind of what challenges you face and how that all went.
Yeah. It's funny. I there were definitely challenges at that, turning point moment, but I almost felt like it helped me name challenges that I couldn't even articulate prior to 1990. Growing up in Kalamazoo, Michigan as a brown kid, where if people talked about racial issues, it was framed as a black or white issue. I was neither. I didn't grow up in a big city where maybe at that time period, we have to think about like what the 1965 Immigration Act. And was there a critical mass of Indian Americans in Kalamazoo, Michigan? No. Maybe in New Jersey, maybe in other places. And so maybe people my age from those bigger cities have a bit, in swapping stories, they have a bit of a different experience. For me, I felt relatively isolated. But to get back to your question, it was more like um, it helped name the isolation that I felt growing up, where nobody would ostensibly say, "Oh, you're kind of over here because of this element of your identity." We didn't, and in that way, we were spared for the most part overt forms of racism, but this felt sense of like, well, I'm not going to be one of the cool kids, and again, not to chalk it all up to like racial identity or other factors, but it made me at least put language to like that might have had something to do with my sense of not feeling a complete sense of belonging. And then trying to put gender and race together, because here I am as thinking about being a male who has privileges, and now embracing this idea of being a person of color who is an oppressed person, and but I'm the same person. So in
Mm,
any given scenario, in any situation, is this me as, am I talking as a privileged person, or am I talking as an oppressed person? And at that time, in that era, I think identity politics was in its heyday in progressive circles at University of Michigan. So, you know, people would talk, well, speaking as, and you'd name all these identities, and was almost like in these progressive circles, the more badges of oppression that you could label in your intersectional identities, the more authority in that room you had to speak.
mm,
And I got that. I got why that is, and I also saw there's limits to treating it as everything or as an algorithm, and it's funny because that really brings itself full circle to the work that I'm doing today. Um, I'm always suspect of people that only think about these identities and nothing else. And I'm suspect about the people that are saying, oh, no, no, we don't need to think about these, sociopolitical identities like race and gender.
mhm,
And look, the current backlash on DEI and all of that. It,
mhm,
you know, there is some truth to the fact that, yes, there is a deeper humanity that is not just about our intersectional identities, but to ignore the lived realities of these identities where we're kind of um um destroying or invalidating people's lived experiences because of something that I experience, something that you experience as a woman every single day that a man would not
mhm,
relate to, or as a transgender person that a cisgender person wouldn't be able to relate to.
mm,
Those things have a cumulative effect.
mm.
I feel like I've gone all over the place, but
No,
this is how
you're
my brain
good.
thinks,
I was listening intently, and now I'm going to bring you back because I
Yeah,
would love
okay.
to know how you got to even be thinking about those things. I know for
Yeah.
myself, in my upbringing, uh, what's funny is funny, I guess is the placeholder word here, but my grandfather was very young during the partition, during the revolution, all of that, and was very much a part of those movements, even spent some time in prison for some actions against the British,
Wow.
and
I did not know that.
and again, those are depth giving moments in folks' lineage, and so I want to know, like, I'm hearing you talk about identity and privilege and oppression, and I want to know how you got to even think about these things. So I'd love to pull you back a little bit and hear a little bit more about parts of your upbringing or your earlier journey that got you even thinking about some of these topics, and interested in the work that you started to do.
Yeah, that's a great question. Uh, I think it's a kind of, thinking about it, it's a combination of things. I told you about the story of my grandfather. Combine that with the fact that my parents grew up Arya Samaji, so the sect of Hinduism that among other things, as I understand it, was sort of doing away with the idea of idol worship. Pretty radical or progressive, however you might want to call it, within the Hindu fold. Equal education for women and abolishment of the caste system. So I think my experience of Arya Samaj and the Arya Samaj chapter in Nairobi that my parents were sort of raised with, I think there was this progressive streak in the family. My dad's older sister went back from Kenya to India to become a lawyer in the high court in Chandigarh, and had
Mm.
done a lot of stuff on behalf of oppressed people and rights of people that have been victimized by the abuse of power. And so uh, that was there. But we didn't necessarily have the language, especially around gender, like even my dad, it was, he went to England and he was a Marxist, closet Marxist when he became a professor at University, at Western Michigan University. But when I was talking about doing the sexual assault prevention work and looking at, and he's like, why gender? Like, why, like, what kind of guy, like, sort of unpacks gender and that kind of thing. But I think it was, oddly enough, even though he couldn't relate to that element, it was that progressive upbringing, I think, that was part of the fuel for this. And then going to Michigan, where through identity politics and the discourse that was happening in that era, um, really putting my ear to the ground about, like, how do we look at social justice from
Mm.
these various lenses?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful in understanding kind of the context here and how that almost launched you forward, right? Even if the work that you started to do, especially with sexual assault, I imagine men doing work in sexual assault, right? Advocacy and the work that you did was probably pretty rare
Yes.
at that time, and
Yeah.
probably still is rarer
Is
than it should
yeah.
be. And
Yeah.
so, I can see how that, new thinking. You actually sparked a memory that I haven't thought about in a long time, which is this moment at the temple that I had where I remember we were doing some sort of puja, and then the pandit asked, all the women to kind of step back and the men to kind of be in the middle, and one of these, he was probably 4 or 5 years older, but one of the smartest kids in our community said, "Well, why can't my mom be a part of this puja? Isn't this to bless everybody?" And the Pandit didn't really have a good answer. And
Yes.
that was one of those moments for me that I remember I must have been in middle school, high school, where I started to think about things a little bit differently. From there, like, wait, I can question things, right?
Yeah.
Questioning a pundit in the middle of a puja in the
Yeah.
temple. What a radical thing to do, right? And
What a
so,
radical thing.
um,
And before that moment, that wasn't even within the realm of possibility for you that a guy
mhm.
would disrupt something that might be sexist, and to be able to question it, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
And
that
yeah,
again, this and it even gave him some sort of clout because he was known as that like smartest kid in the the everybody looks at this kid at the parents are all, hey, this guy got a 1600, this guy did this, or this guy's going to this college, right? So it gave him some sort of power, right, to be
yeah,
able to even stand up and do
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
How did you
yeah.
use Yeah, go ahead.
No, a friend, somebody I used to work with at University of Chicago said, we talk, everybody's unpacking privilege and unpacking the privilege knapsack, the great work of Peggy McIntosh. And my friend said, I've come across this phrase of spending privilege, and
Mm,
it sounds like if you've got privilege, you have this privilege to spend. And it sounds like in that moment, that son, on behalf of his mother and other women, was spending that privilege pretty, wisely.
mhm,
But that also brings up for me, how did I get into this? It was incremental, I've shared this story before, how in college at the time I was having issues in my relationship. I was in a long-term relationship with a woman, and things were mostly going great. Then she would point out ways in which I might presume that I'm more right than her, or that I'm talking more than her. And just this stuff that came, was unchecked previously.
Mm.
And that feedback was flying in the face of how I saw myself. I'm a good guy, like then this is making me feel like I'm not a good guy. But the more I kept scratching at it, the more I was like, there's something here. So I think my curiosity about that led to, okay, I got to tackle this issue of gender in this awesome class, one of my favorite classes in undergrad, which was attitudes in social behavior, where you chose any social group that you can construct. And there was like 35 students in the class. We met in a big circle for 3 hours on a Wednesday evening. But you could choose wives of Presbyterian ministers as your social group. And what do? You interview um, people in that group, and you write a profile of each one of those 8 people you interview. And at the end of the semester, you do a synthesizing paper. So very qualitative, very like interactive, relational. So I chose women as working professionals, and one person. This is a longer story, but to me, it's worth it. It's one of the women that I interviewed was the director of the Sexual Assault Prevention Center. And while I'm waiting in the lobby, and by the way, that center, if my understanding is correct, the best funded rape prevention center across the country in terms of for college campuses. It was very. So I'm sitting there waiting to interview the executive director, and this man comes out with a clipboard, John Ifcher, and he's like, "Hi, I'm the men's outreach coordinator. Would you like to sign up your name to be a part of our men's support group?" And I really did not want to, but I was like, first impressions, what if the ED comes out while I'm saying no to this guy? So I signed my name up. Well, after the interview went fine. After the interview, I get a call, and we'd like to do a pre-screening for you. I do the pre-screening, and then we're going to show up at the counseling center that just happens to be at the counseling center. We're going to do an 8-week dialogue group, and we're going to have you commit to these 2-hour sessions. We're going to talk for 8 weeks. And it just so happens that some of us that signed up got there before the facilitators did. And all we see is white carpet and pillows on the ground. I'm like, what the heck did I just sign up for? What are we going to get into? And then the facilitators arrive, and it was 8 weeks of semi-structured topics, men's roles in society, men in violence, homophobia, men and their fathers, relationships, all, down the line. It was Encore, it was the most impactful experience. And I think that's what opened the gates for everything, not just getting involved with sexual violence prevention, but wanting to become a therapist,
Mm.
because it was the tools of these men leading this group, just facilitating, making it okay for us to ask each other questions and do opening rounds and all of that. And it hit me like, if we didn't have this space, I wouldn't have realized that me and this guy across from me feel the same way about the same topic. Because outside of here, maybe we would have just made jokes, or we would have talked about sports or whatever, because of just what we're encouraged to talk about and discouraged to talk about. And so I was just amazed by how you create the right space, and beautiful and unexpected things can happen. And that's been one theme that's carried into my work, as a therapist, as a facilitator, as a consultant, as a musician, you know,
Mm.
is just, if we set the ingredients in the right way, there's magic in these spaces we can create.
What an amazing experience. I'd love to even have that experience now, to have that, space is such an important word here, right? To be given a space to be able to explore these topics, explore yourself, and really grow through that. And I want to give you some flowers that I was going to save for later, but one thing that I realized, and I told you this, I recently went to watch Funkadesi live, which is my first time seeing you all. perform and listen to you on Spotify and everything. But of course, you all are way, way, way more of a important experience in real life. And one of my prominent thoughts that I walked away from was, I'm watching this band that is, a global band. You look up at that stage and you see people from that can be from every corner of the globe, and you hear these sounds, and I heard the sounds of my childhood, and I heard the sounds of others childhoods, right? And I had this moment where I was thinking, I'm like, what would like college version of me think about this experience,
Mm.
being at an Irish pub, listening to this global music, right? Led by a South Asian male, right? And so it's like, such an important thing is that you're doing here, which is making space, and you make space in so many different ways. And so I'm curious if you can talk more about the music piece and how did that come into your journey? Was that always there? And then,
Yeah.
how is that integrated with everything else?
Uh, that's a great question, and thank you for those kind words. Yeah, the band is celebrating 30 years this year, and we're just having the time of our lives. Um, but to answer your question, uh, it's all clear to me now. But we talked about 1990 was the sort of cultural inflection point. Well before 1990, I wasn't playing Indian music. I by fluke I stumbled into playing guitar at the end of junior high and into high school. And I gravitated towards blues music, funk music. I was fascinated by improvisation. And I look back now and it's very clear to me music was my therapy,
Mm,
because like I said, all the cultural identity confusion or just lack of like a North Star for me in terms of navigating this bicultural world, um, and not figuring out how I belonged. Music was immediately an infinite world of where I could express myself, where I felt like I belonged without having to be invited. So I really, yeah, even through college, like if now we can think about like brain chemistry and all of this and dysregulation and regulation. Like if I'm stressed out and anxious, and even halfway through grad school and becoming a psychologist, I never fully realized how much anxiety was like a factor in me because I'm a laid back guy. I don't have anxiety, but it's like no, anxiety has been you know pretty profound. I just didn't realize it. But let's say I get overwhelmed and anxious in the middle of studying for exam. All of a sudden, I plug in my bass amp in my dorm room and I just do whatever for like an hour. And I notice I'm in a better place
mm,
to study and to do whatever. So in many ways, like, in terms of cultural identity, in terms of brain chemistry, in terms of like mitigating anxiety, music has been my therapy. And now um I get to look in hindsight and with foresight, but like how do I get to bring these experiences to other people where we're firing on all cylinders? We're utilizing music as a modality for people to engage. And we're talking about themes about affirming our humanity and belonging and something that's an intersection of mental health and social justice, and using multicultural arts as sort of a route for all of that. And honestly, Encore, I'm just having the time of my life, um now that I've taken the time to see how all of these things can kind of fit together.
mm, yeah. I love that idea of music as your therapy, and allowing yourself to kind of lose yourself in that, to help with the overwhelm. that comes sometimes with life. And I think I use that too. I don't have any musical talent necessarily. My air drums are pretty good, but otherwise, I don't play music, but I am very good at listening to music. And it is also
Yeah.
a very therapeutic tool for me. I've got a therapy playlist on my phone that I will pop on, and I can see how important that is. And I think this is what I see about you, in the time that I've gotten to know you is, how very much you like to lose yourself in the creativity of things too, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's a theme that's sticking out for me here too, is just the paths that were opened both for you and by you, right?
Mhm.
And how that allowed you now, like going to the top of how I introduced you, which was like 17 titles, and I could have probably added another five, right? And so I love that, you are very multifaceted in the way that you approach life and that you approach your work. Um, what what else do you want people to know kind of about your journey, or about, how you came to be the Rahul Sharma that the world knows today?
Yeah. I do wanna answer that question. I do feel like one thing that I wanna let people know about the work that I do, depending on when you'll be able to put out this, um, you know, uh, interview or our dialogue is, I'm really blessed for 3 years running, maybe 4, um, being able to curate a couple of series in the Chicagoland area that are funded through Healing Illinois, which is all about healing from racism throughout the state of Illinois through various programming. And they have different categories, like doing it through dialogue, doing it through narrative change, doing it through um, exploration of space, like historical spaces, spaces where things have occurred over different periods of time. So the two series that I have been able to put together, um, one is called Embodied Healing for Social Impact Makers. And so this year we're doing 4 events. My colleague who you might know, Orson Morrison, clinical psychologist out of Oak Park, who is multiracial and has really taken the lead on looking at um, healing through our ancestors, ancestral journeying. So, he's gonna do the first event in the 4-part series. So these are gonna be Sundays, 11 AM. So he's gonna be April 26th. My thing is gonna be finding joy through justice, sort of picking up, where we left off with the SASM. Shout out to SASM event in January. But, drumming and dialogue, will be my session May 3rd. Then a couple of colleagues are going to do Chinese energy work May 17th and sort of like embodied healing. And then we're going to do a 4-hour retreat on June 7th. So, anyway, I'm saying all of that to say, um, there was a great response. Some of our friends from SASM were able to come to some of these events, and glad to make this free, and really wanted to design this for people that are in the throes of social impact work. It could be
Mm,
social justice leaders. It could be frontline workers. It could be people that are just, feeling frayed by the socio-political climate that we're in,
mm,
and wanting to create a space for people to think about self-care in an affirming way. So there's that series, and then the other series is affirming our humanity through the arts, where I get to bring in the drummers in the band to do bigger events where we're doing a multicultural drum circle, and I get a partner with Sonal Agarwal and other people to where she does this thing, talking about the power of the mic and what
mm,
happens when we sort of like it's like a writing workshop of authoring our own stories and sharing our own truths, and how do we create a collective piece that we perform together by the end of the workshop, and I'll be playing music, and Amina Love, the great artist, will be, playing bass and maybe even singing a little bit. So we're still putting together the finalized dates for that, but that's also going to be in late spring. And so, and I'll have it on LinkedIn, I'll have it on my website, Strategic Inclusion. Um, but when you ask the question, that's what's exciting me about my journey now is I feel like feel like a kid in a candy store because it's so engaging and fun, and all of this to me is in the service of healing.
mm,
Really paying attention to how do we stay connected with each
mm,
other, and how do we fight the good fight, because there's plenty of areas in which we need to be resilient, we need to
mm,
be strategic, and I feel like at a macro level, what we really need to do is fight disconnection
mm,
um, from each other. And how do we? What are the different ways we can show up for each other and show that we all belong to each other?
mm, mm. That's beautiful, and it's beautiful work that you're doing in the community here. I think "kid in a candy store" is a really great way to describe you and your personality in general, Raul. Like, I think, I always have fun when I see you. We're always laughing. And so, but I'm going to turn that a little bit. Tell me
Huh?
about how do you deal with it when the candy is, well, I was going to say sour, but some people love sour
Yeah,
candy.
yeah.
So,
When things are
but when
not,
the candy is not good, how do you deal with that kind of stuff in life?
yeah, that's a great question, and you know, for anybody listening, take it for what it's worth. Like, I think acknowledging that I have more tools under my belt, but things are still hard when they're hard.
Mm,
And but I think the thing that helps me is a commitment to self improvement. You
mm,
know, I was able to say in the sort of video for the Brown Man Therapy Award, about like let's make accountability sexy, and thinking
mm,
specifically about for men, and
mhm,
part of that came from when you work with I did some of my study on working with men who are court ordered for treatment for spousal abuse, and so we look at batterer intervention programs, and the best of those programs were ones that centered accountability, and accountability was what everything needed to be tethered to, accountability to the impact that you have on others, accountability to your actions, accountability to the women in your lives, all of these kinds of things. So, yeah, just I feel like accountability is so important. And for me, accountability shows up in saying I'm always a work in progress.
mm,
As much as I've self-reflected and worked on myself, I'm finding new ouches and uh-ohs and stuff where it's like, yeah, I got to tune that up a little bit. So what I found, and this is what I think has been effective for my work as a consultant as a coach, is leaders need to hear that. Leaders need to demonstrate that there is a tremendous power, and you get a tremendous buy-in from other people when you demonstrate a genuine um commitment to self-improvement. Like, instead of trying to say, look, hey, I'm great and it's my way or the highway, to actually say, I'm going to sit with that for a bit, and you know um and then show the folks on your team that, like, wow, okay, I want to try to do things better or whatever. Not in every situation, but in the work that I do, I think we run into problems when we deal with leaders that are not self-reflective and not committed to self-improvement.
mm, mm. mean, the accountability is sexy line is a sexy line.
Hey, we
And
can make shirts. So we will go in together on this and make the t-shirts.
well, you said that in the video when we presented you with the award at the gala, and I think that was probably the most repeated line of the night. And so I love, as we start to head towards the end of this conversation, I know you and I could probably sit here for hours and talk. But, I think one of the things that we want to do with guys and chai in this podcast is also give people something practical, applicable to use in their life, or potentially use. With my therapy clients, sometimes we talk about building out the tool chest, right? And I remember growing up, my dad had this huge literal chest of drawers of tools. I don't know, some of those drawers probably didn't get opened for months or years on end, but there were always those moments where something had to be fixed or changed or something. And my dad would say, "Oh, I've got a tool for that." And so really what we want to do is bring folks some potential tools that they can add to their own toolkits. And so I'm curious, building off, and I think you started to talk about this a little bit around accountability and how you reflect, how you try to encourage yourself to grow and be more open. Is there a specific tool that you wish to share with the folks listening, that helps you refocus, reframe, and move forward?
I'm smiling because it's very much related to the title of this podcast. Because whenever I present, and it's a big part. I'm working on a book, and it's a big part of this book that I'm working on is um, when I'm presenting on this toolkit that you're referring to, or a set of ingredients or values. I always say to people, I got to represent my Indian heritage and share my chai recipe. And if there's a
Mm,
PowerPoint, I'm showing a beautiful image of the thali with all of the, the cloves and the cinnamon and the, cardamom, all of that. And yeah, had people like like you could hear the crowd like, oh yeah, they're super excited. And then the next slide is like, sorry, I'm just talking about an acronym. But CHAI as the acronym is compassion, humility, accountability, and insistence.
mm,
So, compassion, when we're doing social justice work, when we're just relating to each other, that I always think of this phrase, be kind, for everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about.
mhm,
And that's recognizing, yeah, parts of me are reacting to certain situations. And what is the part of the story that I might be missing, or what might be going on for this other person that I might be missing? Humility, I really thought about that in the context of when some of us doing social justice work can sometimes have this holier than thou attitude. Like, well, my analysis is up here, and I know that you need to be doing this, and you're over here. And versus, are you humble enough to, again, you don't know the full picture. And the thing that if you ever have a desire to want to call somebody out, are you as willing to be called out? Or the
mm,
words that I prefer, like call each other in, call each other forward, so that to me, that's the humility. Accountability we talked about, right?
mhm,
Accountability to the impact we have on others. And then the last one, I use the word insistence to talk about it's great to be all of those other things. And we're living within systems that are unjust. And so we need to be insistent, kind of like that guy, right, with the clout,
mm,
asking, the pundit about the seating arrangement for men and women. Insistent, uh, insistence might be, saying the uncomfortable thing, empowering yourself to stand up for your own sense of belonging and dignity, or stand up for other people's sense of belonging and dignity. Because there's plenty of times nowadays where it might not be completely safe for certain groups to stand up for themselves. So how are we showing up for them? You
mm.
know, so that's compassion, humility, accountability, insistence. That's my recipe. And, I taught clinical psych students for 13 years, and I would do the multicultural psychology class. One semester, I showed them my chai recipe, and then I had people break into groups and come up with their own values recipe for being a good therapist.
Mm,
And so, and one ambitious group, I have it saved somewhere, came up with guacamole. And it was a whole lot of values, but we had fun with it. But again, getting people to just reflect on what are your values, and
mm,
as you know, in some of my work, with some of my favorite things to do involves using this deck of cards, live your values.
mm,
Just protecting time to think about what are our deepest held values individually within an organization, and do we get to live those values every day, or are there ways in which we could be living those values more?
mm. I absolutely love that, and I'm guessing that on the side of that chai recipe acronym here is a little bit of evaporated milk.
Way to bring you home. That was
Yep.
good.
Well, we as therapists, we got to bring it full circle at the end of our
How much?
sessions, right?
Yeah. That
So,
was too good.
Rahul, look, I really, really value you putting in the time and the work and the energy that you always do. You always bring that energy, you bring the effort. The insistence piece really sticks out to me,
Mm,
when I think about you and
mm.
the story that you shared with us today and the insistence on things that keep coming up in the history of your life, of your family's life, and your intentionality as well in doing the work that you've done and showing up as the human being that you are to the people in your life and the people that you don't know, right? I think probably 10 seconds it takes to meet you and then feel like you're friends with you. And
Oh,
so
appreciate that.
I really appreciate you being a part of, you know, my life in the last couple years or so, and I've learned a lot from your work and your model that you've created for all the rest of us that are doing this work. When I started out in this field, whatever that was, 13, 14 years ago, I could have never imagined meeting other South Asian male therapists and psychologists and working alongside them, and so it's been a real honor to get to know you and to have you on today to share part of your story here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to say the same in return, to see brown man therapy, to see you, and when am able to see what you're posting on Instagram or wherever it is, and you're just this is what I love about nowadays, right? Like, we get to take our craft beyond the therapy room and actually bring knowledge to people, bring important information to people. And I just appreciate the spaces that you create
Mhm.
through brown man therapy and through the work that you're doing. So, you know, uh right back at you.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for being a guest. I hope folks, enjoyed the conversation and took something away from it. The idea here is for us to share our stories because that's what we connect with, right? And immediately you shared your story about your grandfather, and it went back to my grandfather. I always ask my clients at the end, any final thoughts or feelings you'd like to share before we wrap.
Uh I think we covered a lot. I mean, I would like to do a I'm not going to say shameless, but a shame-free plug, strategicinclusion.com. I think you've shared the LinkedIn, and Funkadesi.com. Very excited to continue our 30-year celebration, June 4th at City Winery. I don't know when this is coming out, but whenever it is, like, Funkadesi.com will have all the info that you need, and on Instagram and all the things.
Yeah. Well, wherever you are listening to this from, please follow Rahul and his work, his music, his life. It's a real joy to know you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Ankur.
All right, Rahul. Take care.
Take care.
See ya. So one of the final portions of our episodes is a last reflection of sorts, and you know, I'm going to give you my immediate thoughts here, and then I might come back and give you some further reflection. But I'm really feeling motivated right now. I know Rahul. I've known him for a couple years now. So, I've heard the chai recipe, but really hearing him talk about it today in the context of his story and his family's journey, of which we only heard a small amount, is really eye-opening to me because I think, the theme that kept coming back to me is, like I said, to Rahul, was the insistence. We can have the compassion, the humility, and the accountability, but we have to be assertive with making change and pointing out things like oppression and things that hold us back in whatever way that looks like. And that goes both outwardly, systemically, but also internally. And I think that's what connected with me was, he said something about privilege, I think as currency, or that was kind of how I heard it. And I think Rahul is a person who has used his ability, his talent, his knowledge, his wisdom, and his privilege as currency. And that's what we hope for people, right? Is that they use what they have been given, they use that what they have grown for themselves to do good. And I think Rahul really embodies that. And so, it really kept coming back to me during this conversation, the doors that were opened and that he opened. Um, he has stepped through those very strongly and made an impact. And so I'm really glad to know Rahul and to have had him on as a guest. I hope that you all have taken something away from this conversation, and hope you'll join us next time on our next Guys in Tech. Take care, everybody.